Well, let us start off with the usual prayer for teacher and student. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavai Tejasvinavaditam Astu Vishavai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May that one protect us both. May that one nourish us both. May we work together with great energy and vigor. May our study be illumined. May we not unnecessarily disagree with each other. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. So I wanted to make Saturday mornings orientated around myths, just carrying on some of the things that we've done in the past, namely the story of Rama and also the stories from the Bhagavatam. I didn't want to exclusively make it from there because throughout the entire world, in the history of mankind, storytelling has been a very, very powerful influence culturally, just from an entertainment point of view, but also to convey some profound ideas. We find these in Greek mythology, we find it in Indian mythology, Egyptian mythology, and also associated with various religions. And so today, of course, is what is celebrated as Epiphany. In some Christian traditions, this is really the central event. In other words, it is Christmas itself, giving us a great idea that we shouldn't take dates and events seriously in the sense that they're literal. We should rather take the symbolism. Very often, if we take the symbolism around an event or a story, we get firstly much more value from it. But secondly, we stop any infighting, any difference of opinions, which leads to arguments and leads to a severe dissociation with our fellow man and woman. So there's only one reference in Matthew's Gospel to the coming of the Magi or Magi, and it is a very brief reference. It doesn't say how many people came. It simply says that these distinguished foreigners came. They are said to have visited Jesus after his birth, bearing gifts. And the gifts are golden, frankincense, and myrrh. Now, naturally, the first question that arises in our minds is, what is the significance of these three things? And of course, they are contributing figures to the traditional crib. But of course, from childhood, I was told, no, you can't add Jesus, or the figure of Jesus, until the actual birthday of Jesus, namely 25th in Western Christianity. And secondly, you cannot add these three magi, or often referred to as wise men, until the 6th of January, and then becomes a whole festival in some traditions between the 6th and let's say the 16th, something like that, or the 12th maybe. So it's different with different traditions, and you can't say who is right. You can only try to inquire what is the symbolism and how does it help us? How does it elevate our mind? That's the most important thing. So there are regular figures, naturally, in the traditional accounts of the nativity celebrations of Christmas. And of course, they're an important part of Christian tradition. Now, in some countries, it's called Little Christmas, and Ireland is no exception to this. And the idea is that during Christmas, I often joke a little bit and say that Christmas is time of goodwill, joy, peace, and stress, because everyone is so busy trying to arrange all that has to be arranged for Christmas Day in terms of decorations, in terms of acquiring presents, in terms of making sure you didn't forget anybody. And then there's this whole Christmas card thing. We have to send Christmas cards out. And then somebody sends a Christmas card and, oh, we forgot about this person. Oh, let's now send a Christmas card back. And it only arrives late. And then in order to do the shopping, I can't get a parking place. And then all the shops are full and so nicely and beautifully decorated. And in some families, small children are crying and all kinds of things. A wonderful scenario, a wonderful cacophony of confusion and noise and peace on earth. So I once somebody sent me a text, 3 wise men, 3 wise women. Had there been 3 wise women, the text said, then they wouldn't have asked directions. According to the traditional story, they had to ask for directions. They would have clearly followed the star. They would have gotten there. They would have assisted in the birth of the baby. They would have cleaned the stall out. They would have fed the animals. And they would have made food for everyone. And there would be peace on earth. So the Gospel of Matthew is really, as I mentioned, the only one of the 4 canonical Gospels to mention Magi. And we can see the English word magic coming from this term. It is actually a term that is derived from the Zoroastrian or Persian tradition. And of course, Matthew has it that they came from the east. Actually, it must be the east of Jerusalem. And they came specifically to worship the King of the Jews. Now that tells us something about the presence. The Gospel never mentions how many, and still most Western Christian denominations have traditionally assumed them to have been 3 because of the statement that they brought 3 gifts. In Eastern Christianity, especially in the Syriac Christian tradition, the Magi offer a number, often are 12 in number, not 3. And in Eastern Christianity, that is so. And then where do we get these traditions? Their identification as kings in later Christian writings, because so far they are wise people. They are people who are involved in maybe esoteric things, some magical things, including experts in the position of stars, astronomy and astrology. But you see in Isaiah, which is where most of the Christian theology comes from in terms of establishing Jesus as a Messiah, it refers to kings coming to the brightness of the dawn, bearing gold and frankincense. And then the further identification of the Magi with kings could be a psalm, Psalm 72, I believe. May all kings fall down before him. So this is the origin, really, of what can be considered to be some level of mythology. Now, some people may argue, well, maybe there's historicity in this, since it's mentioned. And whether it is or whether it isn't, we want to know what is the symbology in it. Thinking that the supreme principle of the universe, who comes as a cosmic balancing power, knows exactly and precisely what people will think about and question some generations later, 2,000 years later. The traditional nativity scene, and we have one behind me here, they depict these wise men visiting the infant Jesus, the night of his birth in a manger. And the whole scene is also the shepherds are there, angels are there. But it should all be understood as an artistic convention, allowing the 2 separate scenes, that is, adoration of the shepherds and the birth night and the later adoration of the Magi, to be combined for convenience sake. The single biblical account in Matthew's Gospel just simply presents an event at an unspecified point after Christ's birth, in which an unnumbered party of unnamed wise men visits him in a house, not actually in the stable. But maybe we could see what modern texts would interpret it as, and so I can read from that now. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, now even historically, Herod is not a good person. Herod is a kind of sellout to the Romans. Herod is not maybe authentically regarded as an authentic king of the Jews, but he's there, and he's there at the behest and the manipulation and the agreement, financial agreement, of the Roman conqueror. So in every story, and you'll see these, and there's no doubt there was a historical King Herod, but in every story, there has to be some villain somewhere, someone who represents the lowest ideals possible to us. And so here we have King Herod. And in his time, and after Jesus was born in Bethlehem, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem asking, "Where's the child who has been born King of the Jews?" Now, this King of the Jews is actually also a written statement that is put as the crime that Jesus was put on the cross for. His crime was his claim to be the King of the Jews, and there it is up front in the nativity scene. So they continue a dialogue. "We've observed his star at its rising and have come to pay him homage." Now, some scholars will go back and say, let us see if there was something like a comet going on, let us say in 6 BCE, or some unusual astronomical event. And in some will establish a date for Jesus' birth, not exactly 0, but let's say 6 BCE. So we've observed his star rising, and when King Herod hears this, he is frightened. And this text says, all Jerusalem with him. Why is he frightened? Isn't this a remarkable echo of the story of Krishna, where the king of that day is frightened that there will be some kind of child that will take his place and will actually displace him. And so there's this remarkable, coincidental, if you will, story going on. And so he was frightened, and he calls together, according to the text, all the chief priests and scribes of the people, all the administrative leaders, and he inquires of them where the Messiah was to be born. And you can see how Matthew is now setting up Jesus as a Messiah from the very start of his text. Anyway, they tell him in Bethlehem, for it's been written by the prophet, and you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judea, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler who's shepherd to my people, Israel. That's the quoted text. And so what happens is Herod secretly calls the wise men and learns from them the exact time when the star has appeared. And then he sends them to Bethlehem, and he says, go and search very diligently for the child. And when you found him, bring me some information, bring me the word, so that I can also go and pay homage to him. Of course, it's a trick. And when they heard the king, they set out, and there ahead of them, the star leads them. That they had seen the star rising, and they've been following it. We don't know for how long, but many people speculate that it is from Persia, what is now Iran. And later we find names coming up, Sea of these magi that gives them a broader scope of travel. Anyway, we'll carry on with the actual text. And so they stopped where the star stopped, and they were overwhelmed with joy. And on entering the house, not the stable, entering the house, they saw the child with Mary, mother, and they knelt down and paid him homage. Then opening their treasure chests, they offered him gifts. What were these gifts? Gold, frankincense, myrrh. These are royal gifts given to a royal personage, somebody who has been born. Matthew tells us straight away, a king of the Jews. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they leave for their own country by another way. That's all we have. So the text specifies no interval between the birth and the visit, and the artistic depictions that we see and the closeness of the traditional dates of December 25th and January 6th, they encourage the popular assumption that the visit took place the same winter as the birth. Now, of course, later traditions are varied, and with the visit taken as occurring up to, let's say, 2 winters later, this maximum interval explains Herod's command that we find also in Matthew's Gospel, which we call the massacres of the innocents. Now, by now, you would surely see a parallel between the infant events of Krishna and the events of Christ. Whether there was some co-collaboration on this, whether early Christianity took the story from the story of Krishna is all up for speculation, and as with any speculation, we don't know, and we don't really care what is the meaning. Now, I would take these 3 gifts to represent, because we have to relate this, of course, to our Vedanta philosophy. And I take these 3 gifts to represent 3 precious gifts that we all have. After all, a small baby having gold, and obviously the parents didn't sell the gold. As far as we knew, they went back into Nazareth and continued the humble occupation of builder carpenter. And so these are symbolic. These 3 gifts are gifts we all have. And I know you know what I'm going to say. These are the 3 gunas. These are the 3 binding elements. Gold can be binding. It also can be liberating. We can lift people out of poverty. We are operating from a Vedanta society that certainly requires funds. Many expenditures are there. And so we won't say, no, we won't take any money. We won't be like Ramakrishna, who says, I won't touch coins. We'd rather be like Holy Mother, who was a prudent with her finances and was able to use the resource. Some may say she's Lakshmi herself. So gold, money, and so on, this is a resource when carefully handled. But when not carefully handled and when not fully understood, then it is to our detriment. What is the most precious thing that we have, the most golden thing that we have? Well, it is purity, it is truth, it is all the higher, nobler values that come under this category of satya. Satya and sattva, these 2 terms are related, as well as the relation up to the term sat, existence. Existence is existence. It is no longer pure, absolute existence if it's blemished by anything else. And what blemishes things the most from our psychological and spiritual point of view is selfishness, an egocentric position. And so the definition really of sattva should be all thoughts and actions and words that are completely pure, completely untarnished, completely never ever stained by an individual selfish interest, even with the label I or me or my. And then, of course, frankincense and myrrh. Myrrh, we see in the a reference maybe in the life of Jesus, where a woman massages the Lord's feet. But we also see that myrrh is something that is fragrant. Frankincense is something that is fragrant. It seems to be fragrant. It seems to spread everywhere. We seem to delight in it. But if you burn frankincense, if you add myrrh, both of these don't last. Gold can last a little bit more, but frankincense and myrrh only last to the extent that it is burnt. These are resins used as incense and without fragrance. They can be used in order to remove unpleasant odors, or they can be used in front of a shrine or in a temple, no doubt. In the temple in Jerusalem, they burnt this frankincense and created this beautiful atmosphere, immediately reminding us of the all-permeating divinity which we find everywhere. But equally pervasive can be meanness. Equally pervasive can be hatred. Equally pervasive can be harshness, anger, unrequited desire, all the things that we put under the category of rajas. And then, of course, if you don't light anything at all, it remains dormant, and this is tamas. So to me, and only to me probably, these three gifts represent these three binding elements, and only one will be liberating. And the other two, all three are useful, but the one represents liberation to us. So now, the wise men are mentioned also twice, shortly after one particular verse in Matthew, and it is in reference to their avoidance of Herod, we'll see. So after seeing Jesus and what Herod had learned from their earlier meeting, the star which they followed has traditionally become known as the Star of Bethlehem. Now, although the Magi are, as I say, commonly referred to as kings, I don't think there's any account in the Gospel of Matthew that implies that they were rulers of any kind. The identification of the Magi as kings is really, as I say, linked to this Old Testament prophecy that describes the Messiah being worshipped by kings in, you find it in Isaiah, you find it in the Psalms. Yea, all kings shall fall down before him, all nations serve him. And so early readers reinterpreted Matthew in the light of these prophecies. And after all, this was the goal of Matthew. Many people cite so many discrepancies within the three synoptic gospels, no matter about the fourth one, and said, and the critics will say, well, we doubt the historicity of this because we have different stories everywhere. But you see, they miss the point. What is it teaching us? Because each one of the texts that we read will be from a different point of view. When we ask this question, who wrote it? For whom was it written? What was the context in which it was written? And what can we gain from it? Now let us see. The earliest gospel from the scholarly point of view is Mark. It is the shortest of the gospels. And gospel means good news. Good news about what? It has to be good news about our possibility of establishing our own freedom. Well, otherwise also called salvation. Salvation from what? Salvation from misery. Salvation from doing harm to somebody else. salvation because we have established what is seen to be the kingdom of heaven. And where is that? It is within us. This kingdom of heaven within us is the central message of Jesus. And Swami Vivekananda points out, if every single text disappears and you maintain this one, and you also maintain blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God, you have everything. You don't need anything more than that. What a wonderful, wonderful synopsis. You see, this forgetfulness of this kingdom of heaven within us and the usefulness of these three gifts in order to understand it and establish it, establish the understanding of it, the reality of it for us. This is the central message. If we forget this, forgetfulness of this fact, otherwise called ignorance, puts us in a lot of trouble. It gives us anxiety, it gives us doubt, it gives us fear, it gives us a position where we feel we are struggling. Philosophy and the philosophy of religion is designed to tell us, no, you're trying to work uphill. Instead of working uphill, why don't you imagine that you're going with the flow in a river, and it is much easier to go with the current, not against it. Now, don't misunderstand me. That doesn't mean to say that we just give up and we just surrender to anything that comes. No. But when the current is seen to be good and useful, when we have faith that it is in our favor, when we surrender our individual pride, then we'll find things arrive by themselves. And we are designed not only to go with the current, but also to usefully swim with it. So this is what we are equipped with. And this is the possibility of a freedom that we have. And all these gospels, this good news is like this. You might say that theologically, the good news is that the cosmic mind in the form of a theophany, because epiphany and theophany, these are two alternative terms. Theophany really comes from the Eastern Orthodox tradition. It gives us the opportunity to have a sight, to look at, to have something revealed to us. What a beautiful idea that this scene that we're talking about can reveal something to us. Now, in the texts, in the gospel, we don't find really any names for these magi, assuming that there are three. But of course, traditions and legends, stories, identify a variety of different names. And in Western Christian Church, they've all been regarded as saints, enlightened people. They're commonly known as Melchior. Melchior was supposed to be a Persian scholar. And then Caspar, or also alternatively known as Gaspar and Jasper and so on, and other variations. And then Balthasar is supposed to be a Babylonian scholar. Now, if you say Babylonia, you just say modern day Iraq, Iran, and so on. This is all proximate to each other. And Balthasar is also often represented as a king of Arabia, or even sometimes Ethiopia. Melchior, king of Persia, Gaspar as a king of India. And we don't know how, I don't know how these traditions exactly arose. There must be some connection somewhere. But the names themselves apparently derive from the Greek manuscript, around about 500 in Alexandria, 500 of this era. So a long, long time, after these events, half a millennia. And they've been translated into Latin and another Greek document from the 8th century, even later, of presumed Irish origin, actually, and is also translated into Latin It continues the tradition of three kings and their names and gives additional details. So it's interesting to see what these details would be like and how they can help our understanding and how useful they would be or otherwise to us. Now, one candidate for the origin of the name Caspar comes from the Acts of Thomas, and it comes out as a word Gondaphares, from which Caspar might derive as a corruption of Gaspar. But Gondaphares declares independence from the Arsacids, and I'm getting this from a Wikipedia article, to become the first Indo-Parthian king. He was allegedly visited by Thomas the Apostle. As we know, Thomas is supposed to have gone to India, to the Malabar coast, and his tomb is there in Chennai. So very early we find this establishment in India, and the Eastern churches, that is Ethiopian Christianity, for example, they say that while the Armenian Catholics have their other terms, and many Chinese Christians also have their own terms, they believe that one of the Magi came from China. Everybody would like to claim these people. But the phrase from the East is quite an interesting one, because we find this in the original text, Matthew. And more literally, it is from the rising of the sun, both in the Quran and in the Gospels. This term from the East really means the direction from where the sun comes up. It's really the only information that we have from Matthew. And so the Parthian Empire, centered in Iran, Persia, what is now Iran, it stretched from eastern Syria in those days to the fringes of India. And so there's big scope for understanding where they came from. And though this empire was tolerant of every religion, its dominant religion, we have to understand, was Zoroastrianism. And Zoroastrianism really is a Vedic religion. We find all the ancient Vedic concepts come through in Zoroastrianism. And we also have to understand that this Zoroastrian had its influence during what we call the Babylonian captivity of the Jews, where many concepts came in, concepts of this contrast between good and evil, angels of good and angels of darkness. Even the whole question of the devil as we understood it later comes really from this Zoroastrianism, this angel that goes astray. And so we can see a link which goes beyond the borders of distinct religions and religious traditions, something that is useful today. The Magi are also described as falling down or kneeling or bowing in the worship of Jesus. And this gesture, and we have to hook it into Luke's birth narrative, they had an important effect on Christian religious practices. And they were indicative of great respect and typically used when venerating a king. And we find it now in Roman Catholic churches called genuflection, where you go down on a knee. And while prostration is now very rarely practiced in Western Christianity, it's still relatively common in Eastern churches and also common in Hinduism, where you'll see people making full prostration, because can you get any lower than the ground? It is the most profound and personal form of respect. So respect, submission, devotion. What is devotion if it is not surrendering your own egoism, your own sense of self? And so this is a little bit about this event called Epiphany today. The three gifts are explicitly identified, just to remind you: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. But there are many different theories of the meaning of symbolism other than what I myself have given of the gifts that have been brought forward. Now, some other understandings. Gold is fairly obvious. We don't really have to expand on that. Gold is gold. But frankincense, and particularly myrrh, they're a little bit more obscure. And so some theories are like this. All the three gifts are ordinary offerings and gifts given to a king, but myrrh is commonly used as anointing oil, and frankincense as perfume, and gold as valuable. Let's see if we can make our own sort of interpretation of this. Leaving gold aside for its obvious symbolism, why would we have oil and why would we have perfume? Let us put it in our ritualistic context, because here, when we light a lamp, typically also light incense in order to get some fragrance. In the ancient Vedic times, the only ceremony was a fire, and the various herbs were gathered together, and these were offered into the fire in order to infuse the forest itself with a fragrant, and we might say herbally healthy odor. Sandalwood is also offered, for example, because the sandalwood is so fragrant. And then oil. Well, oil is the very, very best thing that can be burned. Frankincense and myrrh were burned, both of them, during rituals among Egyptian, Greek, and Roman societies. Ancient Egyptians used myrrh to embalm corpses, and Romans burned it as a type of incense at funeral pyres. And myrrh was used as an embalming ointment, something like that, and used in funerals and cremations up to the 15th century already. The holy oil traditionally used by Eastern Orthodox Church for performing sacraments of chrism and unction, as it is called, these are traditionally scented with myrrh. And receiving either of these very holy gifts is commonly referred to as the receiving the myrrh. So the picture of the Magi that is put in art on the 7th century Frank's casket shows the third visitor. Hugh brings myrrh with something like something over his back that is called a vulcret. It's a symbol consisting of three interlocking triangles. And three interlocking triangles, extended and extended, for us becomes the Sri Yantra. It appears on a variety of objects. We find it in the archaeological records of ancient Germanic peoples. And it is called Vulknut, and the term is a modern development. It's not known what terms were used originally to refer to the symbol, but for us, a triangle with the point upwards represents Shiva, and pointing downwards represents Shakti. So we can see a whole lot of interlinking of ideas in the myths and symbols, which we are discussing today. And it's suggested also by scholars that these gifts were also rather medicinal rather than precious material for tribute. And so many, many different interpretations are there. The important thing is people have sat and thought about these things. What do they mean? And what do they mean to us? And how useful is it to us in establishing something that enhances our mind, elevates our mind. the significant understanding for us really is, why don't we also give gifts? Why don't we also understand that inside the heart of everyone is a royal personage? Why don't we get to the understanding that the kingdom of heaven is within everybody? And should we also not give the very precious things that we have? Let us say that myrrh symbolizes oil that we can use to massage other people. I don't mean massage their egos. I mean giving some kind of love. What about frankincense? Why don't we give them fragrance in our speech? What about gold? Why don't we see that they themselves are precious gold? Why don't we give them something of our personality that will uplift them? Some word of comfort, some word that makes their day shine, like the gold symbol in the sky called the sun. So why don't we become the magi, at least that much, both to ourselves and to others? Well, I think I've exhausted the subject totally. And so I'd ask that we reflect on these things. And I hope that you enjoy the rest of your Epiphany day in a sense of the same spirit in which the Magi presented themselves. So, Om Shanti, 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 peace, peace, peace be unto all. Thank you.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you, Swamiji.